Listen to this with brutal honesty, because we're going to start where almost no one dares, in that voice that speaks to you from within and, without raising its tone, cuts you down. It's not a stranger on the street, nor an unfair boss, nor even that person who criticized you years ago. It's your own thought, that persistent murmur that gets under your skin and turns every doubt into a verdict. You know how it sounds. You're not enough. You're not going to make it. You're faking it. And even if you smile on the outside, inside there's a judge taking note of every misstep to turn it into eternal evidence against you. That voice is good at disguises. Sometimes it calls itself prudence, other times realism, other times it wears the mask of humility, but its effect is always the same. It makes you smaller. It robs you of inches in your posture. It steals minutes of opportunity. It takes away words that deserve to be spoken. Close your eyes for a moment and go back to a recent scene. You had an opportunity to present an idea, raise your hand, send that message, apply for that project. Your heart raced, your palms sweated, your mind began to run. Then came the phrase, "Who do you think you are?" It didn't come from anyone in particular, and yet it carried the weight of every judgment ever engraved inside you. The opportunity passed. You told yourself it wasn't the right time. You explained it logically. "I'm not ready, I need to review more." And a few hours later, when the silence returned, you felt that mix of relief and dishonor. Relief for not having exposed yourself. Dishonor for having betrayed yourself. Stoicism doesn't promise you absolute silence. It promises inner command. Marcus Aurelius didn't stop feeling the pressure of being emperor. He learned to speak truth to himself when the pressure tightened. Epictetus didn't stop encountering obstacles. He learned to separate what depended on him from what only deserved acceptance. And Seneca didn't stop knowing the sting of criticism. He learned to recognize that what hurts is not the event itself, but the judgment about it. You and I are not emperors nor philosophers in togas, but we have the same task: to become guardians at the mental gate, deciding which words build and stopping those that destroy. Imagine your mind as a room full of microphones. Some are turned on by default: the fear mic, the comparison mic, the guilt mic. Others are always distant: the equanimity mic, the sober gratitude mic, the self-efficacy mic. Every morning, someone turns knobs up and down. If you don't decide who does it, habit will. And habit, as you know, tends to favor the most dramatic voice. That's why today I propose a very concrete, almost cinematic scene. You, in front of that soundboard, with your hand on the volume control. When "you can't" comes up, turn that knob down. When "try" appears, turn it up. When "do it worse and quickly" comes in, mute it. That's mental training, choosing which voice to amplify and which to leave as a whisper. I know you even if we've never met. I know the little ritual you repeat when you get good news. First you doubt it, then you downplay it, then you attribute it to luck. I know the mechanism when something goes wrong. First you blame yourself, then you generalize. Then you write an entire story where you're the villain. I know that feeling of acting even when you worked hard. That imposter syndrome fed by every gap between your ideal and your reality. You're not crazy, you're not broken, you're not doomed. You're trained. Trained by years of repeating the same script without realizing it. Today we're going to rewrite it. Not with slogans or self-deception, but with clear, sober daily practice. Remember the last time you spoke to yourself with cruelty. Someone pointed out a mistake and you added 10 more. You turned a specific correction into a diagnosis of your identity. If you'd heard someone speak like that to the person you love most, you would have done something. But because the target was you accepted it in silence. This episode isn't about making you congratulate yourself for everything or turning you into your own pocket cheerleader. It's about making you your own coach. A coach doesn't lie, doesn't flatter, but doesn't humiliate either. They observe, correct, plan, and accompany. That's what we'll do here. observe, correct, plan, and accompany. Think of your mind as a city. Some streets always lead to the same place, the square of inadequacy, the avenue of comparison, the alley of it's too late. They're fast routes because you've paved them over years. Today we're going to open detours. I can't promise you brand new highways in a day. I can promise you signposts, signs so that when the destructive thought appears, you can read, "Caution, this is a judgment, not a fact," and you can turn. Turning isn't denial. It's choosing another street and walking it until it becomes familiar too. There are wounds that explain why the voice is so loud, words you heard as a child, patterns you learned without wanting to, impossible expectations hung around your neck like medals that weigh you down. Stoicism doesn't ask you to forget them, it asks you not to turn them into commands. The ancients recommended an exercise. At the end of the day, review without hate what you did, what you said, what you thought. Not to punish yourself, but to adjust. A compass doesn't insult the needle, it aligns it. You may wonder if you can really change how you talk to yourself after so many years. The answer isn't romantic, it's technical, yes, if you practice. Just as the body grows stronger by lifting a little more each week, the mind grows fairer when you train it with phrases, questions, and pauses. Questions like, what evidence supports this thought? What more benign alternative could explain what happened? If a friend were in my place, what would I say to them? Pauses like, breathe, observe, reframe, decide. That inner workout doesn't make you a naive optimist, it makes you a courageous realist. Don't expect applause for this work. It's quiet and sometimes thankless, but it leaves a trace. Suddenly, you sleep better, decide faster, make mistakes without demolishing yourself, and start to feel the ground under your feet. When that happens, the outside world can still be demanding, but you no longer sabotage yourself at every step. That doesn't make you invulnerable. It makes you governable. And a governable life looks a lot like a peaceful life. Today, we're going to dive into 10 lessons that aren't dead theory, but living tools. I ask you to listen to them as if they were instructions from a craftsman teaching you their trade. You don't need talent to use them, you need patience and consistency. The goal is clear. By the end, you'll have a toolbox to turn down the volume of the thought that destroys you and turn up the one that sustains you. To speak to yourself firmly, yes, but also justly. To be able to look in the mirror without lowering your gaze. Before we start, leave a visible commitment, a footprint on the path. Write in the comments, from today on, I silence the voice that denies me. It's not magic, it's a reminder. The kind that, when your mind comes back with its usual repertoire, forces you to remember you chose something else. Choose again as many times as needed. That's the practice, that's the work. And now, take a deep breath, straighten your back, and come with me. Let's learn to silence the cruelest voice so you can finally hear the one that sustains you. Breathe. Today you can change that voice. Without further preamble, let's begin. First Stoic lesson, identify the invisible enemy. Before you try to change your life, before you buy a self-help book or listen to a motivator who promises to fix you in an hour, stop. There's something almost no one tells you. Your greatest enemy is not that person who criticized you, nor the boss who humiliates you, nor the partner who made you feel small. Your enemy lives with you, sleeps with you, eats with you, breathes with you. And the most dangerous part, it speaks with your voice. It's that inner voice that repeats over and over that you are not enough, that no matter how much you do, there will always be something missing, that your effort is useless, that your achievements are coincidences, that your failures are your true essence. And the worst part is that, over time, you learn to believe it. It no longer sounds like an external threat, it sounds like reality. The Stoics knew that the greatest battlefield is not in the Senate, nor in war, nor in the markets, it's in the mind. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man of his time, wrote daily reminders to himself so as not to fall into the traps of his own thoughts. He did not write to impress anyone. He wrote so he wouldn't forget that, even as emperor, he was vulnerable to the voice that pushes you down. Identifying your invisible enemy is an act of brutal honesty. It's not about labeling every uncomfortable thought as negative and discarding it. There is self-criticism that helps, that pushes you to improve. But the inner enemy is not looking for your improvement, it seeks your reduction. You'll know it because its tone is not firm but cruel, because it doesn't speak of possibilities but of limits, because it doesn't question your actions but your worth as a person. I invite you to do an experiment that will change how you see yourself. For 1 week, every time you feel yourself dimming, your energy draining, your motivation breaking, stop and write down the exact phrase you told yourself in that moment. No filters, no embellishments, just as it sounded in your head. You may discover that you repeat the same words over and over, like a chorus you never questioned. That record is your war map. You'll see that your destructive thoughts appear in specific moments, when you make a mistake, when you compare yourself, when you try something new and feel you don't fit in. And the most shocking part, you may find out they are not even yours. They are phrases you heard years ago from someone who marked you, whether unintentionally or on purpose. A father who told you you're no good at that, a teacher who humiliated you, a partner who repeated, "No one else will love you." Those words stayed hanging in your mind like old posters that should have fallen long ago. Stoicism calls it prosocial, vigilant attention. It means you can't live on autopilot, because on autopilot, that voice wins. A Stoic watches his mind as a sentry watches the city walls. Not to live paranoid, but to anticipate the attack before it gets through the gate. Now here comes the hardest part. That voice doesn't always lie entirely. Sometimes it mixes truths with poison. It reminds you of a real mistake, but uses it as proof that you will always fail. It points out a legitimate weakness, but amplifies it until it becomes your identity. And that's the most perverse trick, disguising self-destruction as self-awareness. Your task is not to shout back at that voice. You won't win that way. Your task is to recognize it. Give it a name, identify its schedule, its triggers, its tone, know when it appears and what it wants you to do. Because when you know, it can no longer manipulate you. It can no longer push you into resignation without you noticing. I want you to see it like this. Your mind is a house. The destructive inner voice is like a guest who moved in without an invitation and over time started to believe they own the place. At first, maybe it saved you from a real danger, like stopping you from taking too big a risk. But now it lives shutting windows so light won't come in, blocking doors so you can't leave, and moving furniture so you trip. If you don't acknowledge it's there, it will keep doing whatever it wants. This is the start of all real change, observing without judgment, but with absolute clarity. You cannot deactivate what you don't know, and when you know it, it's no longer invisible. You are no longer an unconscious hostage to your own thoughts. You become the guardian who decides what stays and what goes. The invisible enemy will always try to come back. You can't kill it, but you can take away its control. And the first step is this, knowing that you are not it. Knowing that voice is not you, but an echo you can choose to stop feeding. Second Stoic lesson. Don't believe everything you think. The most dangerous thing about a thought is not that it appears, but that you believe it without questioning it. Sometimes your mind throws out phrases as naturally as you breathe. I'm not enough. I'm going to fail. I'll never make it. And because they arrive in your voice and from within, you take them as truths. But here's the reality check. Your mind is not always an impartial judge. Often it's a biased narrator repeating old stories. Imagine your head as a radio that never turns off. Not every station you hear tells the truth. Some are contaminated by old fears, others by criticisms you heard as a child, others by comparisons you absorbed without meaning to. The problem is that when you're not paying attention, that static becomes your background music, and you end up living according to its melody. Epictetus made it clear, "We are not disturbed by things, but by the opinions we have about them." That thought that destroys your self-esteem is not a fact, it's an interpretation. And like all interpretations, it can be wrong, exaggerated, or completely false. The danger is that if you don't question it, you act as if it's the only possible version. This is where Stoic training comes in, learning to separate facts from the stories you tell yourself about those facts. A simple example, the fact is that you made a mistake at work. The story your mind invents is, "I'm useless and always will be." The fact is that someone didn't reply to your message. The story your mind invents is, "Nobody cares about me." It's not about deceiving yourself with empty affirmations. It's not about looking in the mirror and repeating, "I'm amazing," while ignoring what hurts. It's about taking the thought, looking at it directly, and asking yourself, what evidence do I have that this is true? Is it a fact or an assumption? What other interpretation could exist? That pause, that breath, is what breaks the spell. Most people live believing that if a thought appears, it must have some truth to it. But the mind produces thoughts just like the stomach produces juices. It's a constant process, not a certificate of truth. The fact that you feel something intensely doesn't make it real. Feeling fear doesn't mean there's danger. Feeling worthless doesn't mean your worth has disappeared. To train in this, the Stoics suggested daily observation exercises. Marcus Aurelius wrote his reflections to remind himself not to be dragged away by the impressions of the moment. You can do the same. Every time a thought appears that hits your self-esteem, write it down. Then, at the end of the day, read it as if it happened to someone else and ask yourself, would I tell a friend that this is true without hesitation? If the answer is no, then don't tell it to yourself. The mind is skilled at disguising old fears as realism. It can tell you not to bother because it's not worth it, or not to try something new because you're not good at it. And you, thinking it's wise advice, listen. The result is that you never try, never take risks, and without realizing it, you confirm the very lie that paralyzes you. Think about this. If every thought were true, you would be every contradictory version of yourself your mind has invented. You would be brave and cowardly, capable and incapable, worthy and unworthy, all at once. And that's absurd. What you are is not defined by a moment of doubt. It's defined by what you choose to do, even in the middle of that doubt. A Stoic does not seek to control what they think at every moment. That would be impossible. But they do control the weight they give each thought. Not all deserve to be listened to with the same attention. Some should be allowed to pass like clouds, others should be confronted with reason, and a few, those truly aligned with reality and virtue, should be cultivated. If you don't learn to filter what you think, you'll end up a prisoner of your mind, and there's no prison more invisible than that, because it has no bars, yet it limits your steps, no guards, yet it dictates your movements. Escaping that prison requires the courage to question even yourself. The next time a cruel phrase appears in your head, don't rush to argue with it or fight it with anger. Observe it as if it came from a stranger on the street. Ask yourself, does this person really know me? Do they have proof of what they're saying, or are they just projecting something of their own? That distance is what will allow you to respond from reason and not from the wound. And always remember this, your mind is a tool, not an oracle. You owe it no blind obedience. The Stoic is not ruled by the first voice that speaks, but chooses carefully which one to let into their inner council, because they know that a thought is not a command, it's only an invitation, and you decide whether to accept it or not. Third Stoic lesson. Train your mind as you train your body. The body understands practice. The athlete knows it, repeating a movement over and over until their muscles execute it without thinking. The musician knows it, rehearsing the same note until it becomes part of their breathing. Yet, for some reason, we believe the mind should be strong on its own, without training, without discipline, without consistency, as if clarity, calm, and mental strength were gifts that appear one day, and not muscles that must be worked on every single day. The truth is different. If you don't train your mind, it will train itself, and it will likely do so against you. It will repeat the same mental routes it has followed for years, reinforcing insecurity, fear, and self-criticism as if they were immovable truths. A destructive thought that goes unchallenged becomes a habit, and a mental habit is like a worn path in the forest. Each time you walk it, the brush parts a little more, and the trail becomes easier to travel, even when that trail leads to a place that destroys you. The Stoics knew it. No one is born with self-mastery, it is forged, and it is forged in the everyday, in the small moments when you decide whether to let your mind drag you or take the reins yourself. Just as training the body requires repetition, training the mind requires consistency in 3 movements: question, reframe, and replace. Question: when the thought appears telling you you can't or you're not enough, stop and ask yourself, where does this idea come from? Is it a fact or an assumption? Is there proof to support it, or is it just a feeling? This question interrupts the autopilot and opens the possibility that the thought might not be true. Reframe. The Stoic does not deny reality, but can give it a different frame. If you failed at something, instead of saying, "I'm a failure," you can say, "This was a costly but valuable lesson." It's not about disguising the painful, it's about seeing it through a lens that allows you to act with dignity and not from defeat. Replace. Once you detect an unfair or false thought, it's not enough to expel it. You must offer the mind something else to focus on. If your inner dialogue says, "I'll never do anything right," respond with a real fact. "I have done many things well before, and I can do it again." Repeating this answer creates a new mental path, one that leads you toward confidence instead of self-destruction. Training the mind is not an event, it's a process. You don't expect immediate results, just as you wouldn't expect to lift 50 kilos on your first day at the gym. Each time you question an unfair thought, you are doing a mental repetition. Each time you reframe a painful situation, you strengthen your resilience. Each time you replace a cruel phrase with a fair one, you increase your resistance to self-criticism. Think of Marcus Aurelius, writing each night in his meditations, reviewing his reactions, evaluating his judgments, training his mind so that the next day it was a little more aligned with virtue. That was his mental gym. Yours might be a journal, a moment of reflection before bed, or a morning habit of reviewing your thoughts before starting the day. And as with all training, there will be days when you don't feel like it, days when your mind is so saturated you don't want to question anything. But those days are precisely the most important, because mental strength is not measured in the easy moments, but in those when the last thing you want to do is train, and you do it anyway. If you don't train, the thought that destroys your self-esteem will become faster, more automatic, more convincing. But if you face it over and over, one day you will find it's no longer as strong, that its voice sounds distant, that its power over you has diminished, not because it has disappeared, but because you have grown stronger than it. A Stoic knows that the mind, just like the body, responds to care and discipline. If you neglect it, it weakens. If you work it, it strengthens. And in that strengthening lies not just your self-esteem, but your freedom, because a trained mind will not be hijacked by fear or self-criticism. A trained mind can hear the cruelest voice and choose not to believe it. Fourth Stoic lesson: your own opinion matters more than the applause of others. We live in a time where validation is measured in numbers, likes, followers, views, comments, and although these figures change daily, they share one thing in common: none of them define who you are. Yet most people live as if they were a verdict on their worth. When someone says something nice, you rise. When no one says anything, you crumble. That emotional roller coaster is not a reflection of truth, but of your dependence on external approval. Stoicism has warned of this danger for centuries. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of the known world, wrote to himself that neither praise nor criticism should be allowed to shake his center. He understood that applause is fickle. Today you have it, tomorrow it vanishes. And if your self-esteem is tied to something so unstable, your whole life will be just as fragile. The question is, how much weight does your own opinion of yourself carry? Because if the judgment of others weighs more, you live as a slave to the external gaze, and a slave is never free. To break that dependency, you first have to identify where it comes from. You may have grown up seeking your parents', teachers' or friends' approval to feel worthy. You may have learned that love and recognition were rewards for good behavior, and without them you were less. If you don't question those patterns, they seep into your adult life and become the inner voice pushing you to constantly seek others' validation. A Stoic trains to reverse the order. Let your worth be defined by your integrity, not by others' reactions. If you did what was right, if you acted in alignment with your principles, then it doesn't matter whether you receive applause or silence. The recognition of your own conscience is worth more than any ovation. Think of how absurd it is to let someone who barely knows you determine your self-esteem. It's like handing the keys to your house to a stranger and waiting for them to tell you when you can enter. The door to your self-worth cannot be opened from the outside. Only you should have the key. This doesn't mean you should close yourself off to all criticism or ignore feedback. It means you must filter what you receive, taking what is useful and discarding what doesn't build you up. A negative comment can be an opportunity to learn if it comes from someone seeking your good, but if it comes from envy, ignorance or malice, it doesn't deserve space in your mind. The applause of others can be pleasant, but it should never be necessary, and the way to achieve that is by cultivating an internal standard that doesn't depend on applause. Ask yourself at the end of the day, was I honest with myself? Was I faithful to my values? Did I act with dignity, even when no one was watching? If the answer is yes, you've won. The Stoics measured themselves by their virtue, not their popularity. For them, what mattered was not whether others approved of their life, but whether their own soul did. And that takes courage, because it means you will sometimes be misunderstood, criticized, or even rejected. But it also means you will live in peace with yourself, without mortgaging your tranquility to buy temporary affection. If today your self-esteem rises and falls, depending on the comments you receive, start changing the balance. Spend more time listening to yourself than waiting for others to applaud. Reinforce the actions that make you respect yourself. And when applause comes, accept it with gratitude, but don't turn it into your sustenance. When criticism comes, listen to it without letting it steal your center. One day you'll realize that the silence of others no longer unsettles you, that you can walk firmly even if no one claps, that your worth doesn't need witnesses to exist. That day you will have understood what the Stoics knew centuries ago. The most important opinion about you is your own. And when it is built on truth and virtue, no applause or criticism can bring it down. Fifth Stoic lesson: eliminate abusive self-talk. Imagine someone approaching a loved one of yours and saying, day after day, "You're not enough, you do everything wrong, no one will ever love you, you're useless." How long would it take you to intervene to stop that abuse? Surely you wouldn't allow a single one of those phrases to enter their mind without defending them. Now think, how many times a day do you say those same things to yourself? Abusive self-talk is a form of silent violence. It leaves no visible bruises, but it leaves deep marks. And the cruelest part is that, because it comes from yourself, it slips in without resistance, as if it were the absolute truth. The Stoics knew that the most dangerous enemy isn't always external. Sometimes it's that internal voice we've allowed to grow unchecked. This voice wasn't born with you. You built it from experiences, criticism, rejection, and comparisons. Maybe, at first, it was the voice of an overly demanding parent, a teacher who doubted you, or a group that excluded you. Over time, you no longer needed them to speak. You learned to do it yourself, and you do it with precision, with a tone that knows exactly where it hurts. Stoicism doesn't propose ignoring your mistakes or disguising reality with empty phrases. It proposes treating yourself with justice. And justice has nothing to do with contempt. Being fair to yourself means recognizing what you need to improve without turning it into a lifelong sentence. It means you can make a mistake without concluding that you, as a person, are a mistake. To eliminate abusive self-talk, the first step is to detect it. It sounds obvious, but many people reproduce it automatically without even realizing they're hitting themselves with words. Observe your mind for a day. Listen to how you speak to yourself when you make a mistake, when you look in the mirror, when you compare yourself to someone else. Write down those phrases. Seeing them on paper is like turning on the light in a room where you've been stumbling in the dark for years. The second step is to question those phrases as you would an unreliable witness. Ask yourself, is this a fact or an opinion? What evidence do I have that this is true? Would I say this to someone I love? If the answer is no, then you have no reason to say it to yourself. The third step is to replace. The mind can't stand a vacuum. If you just try to not think something, that thought comes back. You must offer it an alternative. If your inner voice says, "You'll never achieve anything," respond with something based on facts. "I've overcome difficult things before. I have proof of my ability." If it says, "You're a mess," tell it, "Today wasn't my best day, but that doesn't define me. Tomorrow I can do better." This isn't about becoming a naive optimist, but a fair narrator of your life, and that requires discipline. The Stoics trained their minds like a soldier trains for battle, with repetition, vigilance, and preparation. Every time you replace an abusive phrase with a fair one, you're building a new mental pattern. Remember that self-respect doesn't start with what others say to you, but with what you say to yourself. If, in your mind, you are an enemy, no external praise will compensate for it. On the other hand, if in your mind you are an ally, not even the harshest criticism can tear you down. With time, you'll notice something powerful: silence. That cruel voice that used to speak non-stop will start to lose strength. And in that silence, you can introduce another voice, one that doesn't flatter you, but that supports you, one that reminds you of who you are, even on your worst days. Eliminating abusive self-talk isn't an act of vanity, it's an act of emotional survival. Because no one can live in peace in a place where they are constantly attacked. And your mind is your home. If you don't turn it into a refuge, it will remain a prison. A Stoic knows that discipline isn't just about waking up early, training, or meeting goals. The hardest discipline is to monitor the words you use with yourself. And the greatest reward is the freedom that comes when you treat yourself with the dignity you deserve. Silencing the voice that destroys your self-esteem isn't a luxury, it's an urgency. If you've ever found yourself believing more in your cruel thoughts than in your own abilities, subscribing might seem like a small gesture, but for us, it means everything. It allows us to continue creating this space where you'll learn to recognize, confront, and deactivate that inner voice that sabotages you. Here, you'll discover how to strengthen your mind, regain your self-respect, and live with the confidence of someone who no longer negotiates their worth. Your peace of mind is non-negotiable. It must be defended. Sixth Stoic lesson: evidence destroys the lie. There's a phrase your mind repeats when it wants to sink you. You're not enough. It doesn't need to shout it. It's enough for it to whisper it at just the right moment of doubt for you to start believing it. That phrase isn't built on facts but on emotions, distorted memories, and old wounds. And yet, it acts as if it were an irrevocable sentence. The problem is that, after years of hearing it, you stop questioning it. The mind is an expert at building a case against you. It reminds you of your mistakes, exaggerates your failures, and minimizes your achievements. It does this with such precision that it seems to have solid proof. But in reality, it only has loose fragments pieced together to fit its story. The Stoics knew you don't fight a lie with a vague, "that's not true." A lie is fought with facts, with evidence. Epictetus taught that when a negative idea appears, you must interrogate it like an unreliable witness. Show me the proof. If it can't, it doesn't deserve your attention. Start by documenting your victories, no matter how small they seem. Write them down. Keep a record of moments when you acted with courage, when you overcame something that seemed impossible, when you were stronger than you thought. Do this as if storing weapons for a future battle, because that battle will come. On the day the cruel voice tries to convince you you're worthless, you'll have an arsenal to answer it. For example, if that voice says, "You always fail," you can open your record and read, "I finished that project under pressure. I supported my family in a critical moment. I learned something new I was afraid to try." This isn't naive optimism, it's countering fiction with reality. Evidence has a power that emotion can't easily destroy. When you cling only to how you feel, any grey day can erase your confidence. But when you cling to objective proof, the emotional storm can shake you without knocking you down. The Stoics understood that truth is not what your fear says, it's what your actions prove. This exercise requires discipline. It's not enough to do it once and forget it. Every achievement, every act of dignity, every boundary you've set deserves to be recorded. If you don't write it down, your mind will minimize or forget it, and when the internal attack comes, you'll be unarmed. It also requires redefining what you call proof. They don't have to be grand feats. It could be staying calm in an argument where you would have exploded before. It could be getting out of bed on a day that felt unbearable. It could be saying no when fear begged you to give in. Courage isn't measured only in public victories, it's also measured in private battles no one applauds. The ultimate goal isn't just to defend yourself from the cruel voice, but to train your mind to be fair on its own. The more times you show it real evidence, the less room the lie will have to grow. Over time, that "you're not enough" will sound hollow, because you'll have learned to respond, "Here are the facts," and they say otherwise. Stoicism reminds us that reason is one of the most powerful weapons a human has. It's not cold or distant. It's the anchor that keeps you steady when emotions try to pull you away. Using it against your own destructive self-talk is an act of self-respect. Next time that voice appears, don't get into an empty debate. Don't give it the satisfaction of arguing without foundation. Lay your proof on the table and let the truth do its work. A lie can't survive when faced with the light. And little by little, you'll begin to notice a change. The cruel voice won't disappear entirely, but it will lose authority. It will no longer be able to dictate who you are or how much you're worth. Because you'll have learned that your value isn't measured by a passing thought, but by a life full of moments where, with or without witnesses, you chose not to give up. Seventh Stoic lesson: don't be a hostage to your past. There are people who, without realizing it, carry an invisible cell on their backs. A cell not made of iron or bars, but of memories, mistakes, failures, shameful moments that replay in their minds like an endless echo. And no matter how many years pass, they remain prisoners of what no longer exists. The human mind has a strange obsession to return again and again to what hurt us, as if by revisiting it we could change it. But the truth is that the past is a closed book. You can read it as many times as you want, but not a single word will change. The only thing you can change is how you interpret it. Stoicism teaches that the only thing that truly exists is the present. The past is not real now. It's a memory, an image in your mind. And when you allow that image to dictate what you believe you deserve, you become a hostage to something that has no power over you, except the power you give it. Think about it. How many times have you stopped from taking an important step because you told yourself, "I already failed before," or "It will surely happen to me again"? That's the trap. The error stops being in the event that happened and shifts to your interpretation, to the decision to use that episode as a sentence instead of as a lesson. Imagine someone who trips while running. They fall, scrape their knees, and feel embarrassed. If every time they try to run, they recall that moment and relive it with fear, they will end up giving up running forever. Not because they can't, but because they live more in the echo of the past than in the opportunity of the present. The Stoics didn't deny the past, but they used it as training. Epictetus said that what has already happened should serve you as a lesson that makes you wiser, not as a chain that keeps you from moving forward. Your story is not a sentence, it's a manual you decide how to read. To stop being a hostage to your past, you must first identify which memories are still trapping you. Write them down, look at them directly. Ask yourself, is this still real, or is it just a thought I keep reliving? That distance is crucial because it lets you see that what's holding you back is not the event, but the way you carry it. Then, change the purpose of those memories. Instead of using them as evidence of your inability, use them as proof that you survived. Yes, maybe you made a serious mistake. Maybe you lost something valuable, but here you are. You're still breathing. You're still learning. The fact that you can recall it means you overcame it enough to tell the story. It's a shift in perspective that takes practice. At first, your mind will try to drag you back to the old story with the same script as always. Your job will be to interrupt it, like telling an unfair narrator. Don't just tell the bad part. Also tell what I learned. Also tell that I'm still here. It's not about forgetting, that's impossible, but about rewriting the meaning. The past, seen through fear, is an executioner. Seen through wisdom, it's a teacher. And you choose which one you allow to accompany you. Every time you choose to act in the present despite a past mistake, you are breaking a link in that chain. Every time you use a painful experience as a push instead of a break, you are expanding your freedom. Because the real prison was never the memory. It was the decision to live as if you were still there. A Stoic understands that today is the only thing they can act upon. The past exists only as raw material to make better decisions now. Letting it dictate your worth is like handing the wheel of your life to a ghost. The next time the cruel voice uses your history against you, remember, you are not the person who made that decision, nor the one who lived that failure. You are the person who has grown since then. And if you don't let your past define you, the present will have space to show you everything you can still become. 8th Stoic lesson: what you control is enough. One of the biggest mistakes we make when dealing with thoughts that destroy our self-esteem is believing we must control everything. We want to have absolute dominion over every word that appears in our minds, over every emotion we feel, over every reaction we have. And when we fail, we feel as though we have failed entirely. But there's something Stoicism makes very clear. You cannot control the first thought that crosses your mind. It's like the wind coming through an open window. You don't ask its permission, you don't choose it, it's simply there. What you can control is what you do after it appears. That's where your real power lies. Think about it. That cruel thought, that inner phrase that reminds you of every mistake, doesn't ask for an appointment before it arrives. It appears when it wants to, sometimes even in the calmest moments of your life. You don't have the key to stop it from entering, but you do have the ability to decide whether you offer it a comfortable seat or let it pass. In Stoicism, this distinction is crucial. It's not about achieving a mind free of negative thoughts, that's impossible, but about breaking the chain those thoughts try to build. If you can't prevent the first hurtful idea from appearing, you can stop the second one, the one that feeds it, strengthens it, and turns it into truth. Imagine standing in front of a fire. A negative thought is like a spark that jumps. If you let it fall on dry wood and fan it, it will grow until it burns everything. But if you ignore it or cover it with sand, it will extinguish on its own. Your task is not to stop the spark from existing, but to decide what you will do with it. This also means giving up a useless fight. Many people exhaust themselves trying to block, repress, or eliminate thoughts, and in that effort, they end up giving them more attention. The more you try not to think about something, the more present it becomes. The Stoics preferred another approach. Let the thought pass, like a cloud that doesn't need to be chased or pushed away. That attitude is not passivity, it's strategy. Because when you accept that you can't control what comes into your mind, but you can control how you respond, you free up energy. You stop wasting yourself in a lost battle and start investing in the one you can win, the battle of your conscious response. The next time the voice says, "You're not good at this," don't rush to argue with it. Recognize it for what it is, a thought, not a verdict. Breathe. Ask yourself, what can I do now that's under my control? It could be taking one step forward, correcting something, or simply not repeating it to yourself again. That pause, that instant in which you decide to break the repetition, is the most powerful moment of all. That's where mental strength is trained. It's not a fight against everything you think, but a daily choice of which thoughts stay and which ones go. The Stoics knew that absolute control is an illusion, and that peace comes from focusing your energy on what depends on you. If you spend your strength on what you cannot change, like the fact that a thought appeared, you'll run out of resources to act on what is truly in your hands. What you control is enough to transform your life. You can choose your response, your inner tone, the way you speak to yourself, the actions you take afterward. That is more than enough to weaken any thought that tries to destroy you. The next time the cruel voice appears, remember, you don't have to beat it on its own turf. You don't have to silence it forever. You just have to stop feeding it. Because what you control, your actions, your attention, your interpretation, is enough to strip it of its power over you. Ninth Stoic lesson: your worth does not depend on your mood. There are days when you wake up feeling capable of anything. You walk with your back straight, ideas flow, decisions seem clear. And then there are days when you hardly want to get out of bed, when everything feels heavier, when even your reflection in the mirror seems like a stranger. It is on those dark days that your self-esteem is most at risk, because your inner voice takes the opportunity to convince you that you are worth less. But here's the truth that Stoicism teaches: your worth does not change with your emotions. You are not less worthy on your grey days, just as you are not more valuable on your bright days. Dignity is not an action that is earned or lost, it is a condition that remains. The Stoics knew that mood is like the weather. It changes without asking permission, sometimes without any apparent reason. You might wake up under a clear sky, and by noon see dense clouds. But the weather does not change the nature of the mountain. In the same way, your emotional state does not change who you are at your core. The problem is that we confuse feeling bad with being less. That confusion is the fertile ground where destructive thoughts grow. On a low-energy day, those ideas face less resistance. You're not enough. Everything you do is wrong. You won't achieve anything. And because your strength is weakened, it's easier to believe them. This is where Stoic training comes in. It's not about denying what you feel or forcing yourself to be fine all the time. It's about learning to separate your worth from your emotional state. You can say, "Today I feel weak, but I am still valuable. Today I am tired, but I still have the same dignity I had yesterday." This reminder is more than an exercise in self-esteem. It is an act of resistance. Because when you refuse to fall into the trap of measuring your worth by your mood, you take power away from that cruel voice that waits for your moment of vulnerability to attack. On dark days, your task is not to conquer the world or solve everything. Your task is to keep alive the certainty that you are still you and that your essence has not changed. This is not resignation, it is wisdom, understanding that you will not always be able to perform at your best, but you can always preserve your self-respect. Think of someone you love deeply. Would you value them less if they were sad or exhausted one day? Probably not. So why would you do that to yourself? Self-love, from a Stoic perspective, means extending to yourself the same compassion and recognition you would give to another. Seneca said that true greatness is not shown when everything is easy, but when you remain faithful to yourself in difficulty. That loyalty begins with not abandoning yourself on grey days, with not handing over your dignity in exchange for a passing emotion. So the next time you wake up without energy, don't use it as a measure of your worth. Don't make definitive decisions based on temporary feelings. Recognize the moment for what it is, a phase, a climate, something that will pass. Because in the end, your mood can fluctuate 1,000 times in a single day, but your worth is immovable. And the day you understand that, you will stop placing your self-esteem in the hands of something as unstable as an emotion. 10th Stoic lesson: make your mind a habitable place. You cannot live in peace if the place where you spend most of your time, your own mind, is a battlefield. Most people care about having a clean, safe, and tidy home, yet they tolerate living inside a mind full of noise, self-criticism, and emotional chaos. They forget that while you can move to another city or another house, you cannot move out of your head. You are there every day, every hour, every minute, and if that space is full of hostility, there will be no possible rest. Stoicism teaches that the mind should be a refuge, not a prison, a place where, even when there is a storm outside, you can find calm. But that calm does not appear on its own. It is built with vigilance, discipline, and deliberate practice. It requires constant attention to what you let in and what you allow to stay. Imagine your mind as a house with doors and windows. You wouldn't open the door to anyone who came to insult you or destroy your furniture. Yet, we do this all the time with destructive thoughts. We let them in, sit them at our table, and even serve them coffee. What a Stoic learns to do is to become a strict gatekeeper. Not every thought has the right to enter, and even fewer have the right to stay. This does not mean denying emotions or uncomfortable ideas. It means receiving them consciously and deciding what place you give them. A feeling of sadness may sit for a while to teach you something. An unjust thought about yourself? No. Because if you allow it to live there, it will soon start redecorating the walls with its lies. To achieve this, you need 3 habits. First, constant observation. You cannot defend what you do not see. Practice noticing when your inner voice becomes cruel, exaggerated, or unjust. Second, deliberate interruption. It is not enough to detect a destructive thought. You must interrupt it. Change activities, take a deep breath, write down what you're thinking, and look at it from the outside. Third, conscious replacement. Do not leave an empty gap. Replace the harmful idea with one that is true, fair, and more useful. The Stoics knew that self-respect is trained, and that training happens in the intimacy of your thoughts. It is not a public applause or an external acknowledgement. It is the invisible act of taking care of yourself even when no one else does. If your mind has become a hostile place, do not blame yourself. In most cases, you learn to treat yourself this way because someone once treated you that way. But now, you have the opportunity and the responsibility to redesign that space, to evict the foreign voices that settled in like eternal tenants and replace them with a voice that, without lying to you, speaks with respect. Make your mind a place where you are not afraid to be alone. A place that, even in the midst of difficulties, reminds you that you are worthy, that you have value, and that you are capable. Because when your mind becomes a refuge, no external attack can bring you down, and that is, in the end, the true Stoic goal. That your peace depends on you, not on what happens outside. Now that we've come this far, there's something you must have absolutely clear. The greatest sabotage to your self-esteem doesn't come from what others say about you, but from what you accept as truth. You can spend years blaming your boss, your partner, your family, that person who hurt you. And maybe they do bear some responsibility. But the true turning point comes when you stop seeing them as jailers and start recognizing that you hold the key. No one but you decides which voice has access to your mind. No one but you allows a thought to stay and live there. And no one but you can declare once and for all that your worth is not negotiable. Remember this: every time you choose to treat yourself with respect, even if no one else does, you are building walls that protect your dignity. Every time you question a cruel thought, even if it's your own, you are planting seeds of freedom. Every time you say no to what diminishes you, even if your hands are shaking, you are affirming that your life is not a place where anyone can walk in and destroy whatever they find. Stoicism doesn't promise you a mind empty of negative thoughts. There is no such thing. What it offers you is the ability to see them arrive, recognize them for what they are, and decide whether or not to open the door. It teaches you that peace is not the absence of battle, but mastery over the most important territory you have, your inner self. It's easy to forget this when the days feel heavy, when criticism pours in, when loneliness settles in. But it's precisely in those moments when your mind tells you you're worthless that you must respond most firmly, "This house is mine, and here my worth is respected." Make yourself a promise today. You will no longer justify mistreatment, whether it comes from outside or inside. You will no longer confuse humility with surrender. You will no longer accept less under the excuse that it's all there is, because there is always more. There is always a next fairer thought, a next firmer decision, a next act that reaffirms that you are the owner of your life. Let this be your red line. Never allow the cruelest voice to live inside you without paying the price of your attention. Attention is your most valuable resource, and from now on, you invest it in building, not destroying. Tomorrow, challenges will return, old thoughts will return, the temptations to believe you are worthless will return. And when that happens, breathe, remember these lessons, and choose again. Because your self-esteem is not destroyed in a single day, and it's not rebuilt in one either. It is forged in each small battle, won in the silence of your mind. Don't be fooled. Real freedom is not doing whatever you want, but being who you are without fear of your own judgment. And when you achieve that, you will have forever deactivated the voice that tried to convince you that you were less. That will be the day your mind finally becomes the safest place in the world. See you in our next meeting at Stoicism for Winners, where we will continue exploring the riches of Stoic wisdom applied to modern life. Now, take the opportunity to go deeper into Stoicism with new recommended podcast sessions. Follow us so you don't miss any reflection that could help you exactly when you feel everything is too much. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we publish episodes designed to accompany you when life feels heavy, when it's hard to stay calm, when you need a word to remind you who you are. Not following us means risking missing that very lesson that could return the peace you've been seeking. Until we meet again, remember, you are the sole owner of your perception, the creator of your peace, and the warrior of your own battle. This is the legacy of Stoicism, the art of being invincible.